Hey Weirdos, welcome back to The Weird Canadian. Today we're bringing in Joseph Bolton, a celebrated author and storyteller behind Old Grandmother's Tree. The reason I wanted to bring Joseph on is because I believe his journey has a lot of insight into building up your life based around what you want to do. Joseph was a decorated soldier with a 25-year military career, and he left it to do what his passion was, which was find stories about his heritage and tell them to the world in his way. I think this is truly an inspiring tale, and I hope you can learn a lot. So, Joseph, what experience shaped your path into creating the book of the Old Grandmother's Tree?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, my mother's family is French Canadian. All four of my mother's grandparents were born in Quebec. They say like one third of the population of Quebec actually migrated to New England. So I'm definitely a child of that. And growing up, always knew that our family came from this magical, mysterious place called Quebec. Over the years, since I was a child, always researching where did we come from. And then, of course, nowadays we have the tools. We have Ancestry.com, we have DNA tests, and I use both of them to really build a very deep tree into Canada. I did 25 years in the Army. I served in Afghanistan, and I had the pleasure of actually serving with Canadian soldiers while I was in Afghanistan. And it was great because I get to talk to them and form this friendship with them. I know the gentleman that is actually doing the official Canadian military history for Afghanistan, and he told me, you could have mentioned in my book. I said, oh, that's so great. I really meant to me. I think I've always wanted to build the connections, and to leave something behind that's lasting. And to really use the time that I have, wisely and productively.
I definitely agree with that. Like, that's where I think humanity should really focus on. It's really inspiring that stuff that you're taking from our past and learning from, which we still will be forgetting, right?
Yes, very much. And in Old Grandmother's Tree, I wrote something that, first of all, it's entertaining because you don't want to read a book that's entertaining. So it's entertaining, but there are positive lessons in there. Certainly about family, certainly about remembering the connections to our past. One of the themes of the book is that we are the continuation of the story of our ancestors because everything's context in our lives and what we're doing right now. It gives, I think, a sense of importance to our lives as well.
How do French Canadian and Native American folklore intertwine in your stories?
Well, I think is that it really comes down to old grandmother herself. Who was she? So she was an Algonquin woman. Her name was Mitio Goku, and she lived in Toronto in the mid 1600s. In 1652, she was married to another Algonquin, and they had two small children. She was 22 years old at the time, and raiders from the Mohawks actually came up, and her husband was killed in the raid, and their two children were kidnapped by the Mohawks. She never saw them again. And 5 years later, she married Pierre Calque, a French settler. They became my ancestors. So she really built upon her life, and she created something beautiful with it. At the end of her life, when she died in 1699, the French Catholic priest in February wrote about her. Mikio Goku lived a full life with dignity, respect, and love, a courageous and loving Algonquin. And so I use that as an inspiration. I mean, think about how any of us would want to be described at the end of our life, to have lived a life of dignity, respect, and love. So that would be the first part, the foundational part of that, the Algonquin piece. And of course, the French Canadian piece was also very important. I researched my tree. It was that my ancestors, French ancestors, were exactly the very first settlers in Canada, right out there in Nova Scotia. They were the first ones there. There are statues of some of those ancestors standing up there in Quebec City. So a lot of us are. And I think also when I visit Quebec, that understanding has given me a different perspective when I visit. I feel like I belong, but yet I feel also a separation a little bit too because I wasn't born there. When I look around and I see the faces of people who are literally my cousins, because all French Canadians are related, and I look at mountains. My ancestors saw walking on a lane that they walked on like that. It is kind of an interesting experience. I'm in, I'm part of that, but I'm not. And one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book is because it's my love letter to my French Canadian and Quebec heritage. And it wasn't planned this way, but I think it's my way of trying to build a bridge, especially now, trying to maintain that connection is even more important.
You just hit these because I have a similar journey in Canada. So I moved from Ontario a year ago. Now in Newfoundland in a small community called Lewisport. Moved to Newfoundland. Like there's such a rich culture here, and there's such a lovely people.
Uh-huh.
It honestly feels like my home. They made me feel welcome, and this province is beautiful. But when I was living in Ontario, I wasn't taking in all the rich history, the landscape, and stuff like that. I didn't really appreciate Canada until like my home province into like the boonies and kind of urban life.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's nice. We have kind of a similar journey.
Right. And I never been to Newfoundland. I wanted to go someday. My wife's brother goes hunting up there. He drives up there and takes the boat and goes there and goes moose hunting. But I want to go. The option for the book, Shirley Smith, although she was born in Toronto, she spent a lot of her adult life actually in Newfoundland.
Yeah.
And she's in this very beautiful country. And she, she always said that a lot of the artwork that you see in Old Grandmother's Tree is based on a lot of what she understood of the wilderness and the animals of Newfoundland.
Yeah. They're very ingrained in their nature here. Like a lot of them still don't even go to grocery stores because they just go and hunt for their food or grow it themselves.
Yes.
And it's really impressive. What are the obstacles you encountered in bringing these stories to audience?
I think there's a level of work that you have to put in to create a book like this. It took literally thousands of hours to write the book. It took thousands of hours to create the illustrations. There's 2 volumes and there's 450 illustrations. Each one had to be meticulously designed. So I just had the one barrier is just the amount of investment you had to make as far as time and money to put together a book that was good. I mean, Natasha and I wanted to build something that of high quality, so that was one barrier. And the other challenge, of course, was just doing the research. We had to make sure that the Algonquin and French characters in the book of their time periods, whether it was in 17th century, early 20th century Quebec, were dressed appropriately. The buildings looked like they belong in that time period. So we had to research as well. So that's one barrier. And I think the other barrier as far as marketing it is just that, there's so many books out there. You can go on Amazon. There's literally millions of books. You really have to, go out and promote the book itself if you're going to create a book like this. You can't just put it on Amazon and think, well, it's going to be a success. Everybody's going to buy it. Promoting the book, I've gone out to Pembroke, Ontario. I've gone out to Montreal. I've gone out to places in New England. So I have the book at libraries for sale, some bookstores. I actually have this for sale at the Mohawk reservation just south of Montreal, actually at the St. Catherine Shrine. So you have to get out there, you have to meet people, and you have to actually get the book in people's hands.
The biggest part of all of this is throwing yourself out there and putting it works.
Yes, it is.
What was one of your favorite stories to kind of develop and run with?
I think it's really the first story. I think the first 2 stories of the book. The first story begins just before Mitio Goku marries Pierre Kalk. That's her second marriage. And it's 5 years after, the attack, and the village is still kind of suffering from the after effects of that. It's still something that kind of haunts them. Are the Mohawks going to return? And her grandfather in this story actually, decides that, about 5 years is long enough. He takes Mitio Goku by the hand, literally, and goes to Pierre and says, I know you guys love each other. Admit it to each other because I know it, and build a good life. And so that's in the first story. And the second story is the wedding takes it's actually the wedding of Pierre, Count Committee of Goku. And on her wedding night, she gets up early in the morning, wanders into the woods, and she meets trickster animal characters played by First Nation folklore, and also the spirit of her first husband, who tells her, I'm glad that you're not alone, and build something beautiful in your life. And so I think within those two stories, all the themes of Old Grandmother's Tree are there. Family, heritage, building something beautiful with your life. It's all there in the first two stories.
That's amazing. It's really interesting that we're starting to see these stories come out and become permanent, even though the last decade has been kind of like a innovation. What guidance would you offer for anyone looking to explore or share the cultural narratives?
Well, first thing you need to do is you got to talk to your older relatives. You've got to get to those stories, and hopefully you have them. When I was growing up, I heard the stories from my grandparents, from my great aunts, and only now, I think, as a much older adult, do I realize the questions I should have been asking back then. So that's the first thing to do. Is you've got to engage them. You know, a lot of times you get family gatherings, and I've seen that happens all the time. You're out there with your cousins and your people, other family members are your own age, and the older members of your family, they're kind of sitting there by themselves. You know, maybe they're looking out. Go and talk to them, get their stories, and collect those stories. That's the first thing I would say if you want to build a story of your own heritage. The second thing is don't be afraid of retelling that story in a different way. You don't have to build a historical report. You have to build a biography if that's what you want to do. The way I did it in my story was I told the story of my ancestors through the language of folklore. And that's one technique I think that you can use. The important thing is trying to decide right off what is the message that you want to pass on about your family. And that's the biggest advice I give you. Make sure you talk to your older relatives.
My father taught me so much. I wish I hadn't. Some more. Is there any advice you'd offer for like starting a book?
I think it was really deciding what I was doing right off the beginning. My first time I wrote a story, I wrote one story, had it illustrated, and I published it. And honestly, it was kind of half baked. The editing wasn't as good. There were mistakes in the book. I learned a lot from that experience, but the best of it, I think, go back to myself and say, hey, look, if you're going to do it right and build more than one story, build the universe around. So if you're going to do like a fictionalized story, the first thing you need to do is think about the universe of your story. When you write that out and create it, even if the elements are in that story explicitly that you wrote at that time, it does impact how that story is created because it's in the back of your mind. So create a story universe, develop world building. That would be the first step that I would recommend.
I can't agree more, especially like being a YouTuber. So many things to be learned just by throwing yourself on the internet. So, just this, is there any projects that you're working on that you'd like to highlight, or any stories that you'd like to showcase?
Entrepreneurship Tree is a book series. I got the two volumes that are available right now. I'm working on a third volume, which is going to be a prequel and a sequel in the same story, actually. That's coming out late this summer. It's going to be called The Dance of Creation. And then the fourth book of the series is going to come out early next year, and it's going to be called All Around You, There's Light. One thing I'm doing a little differently with these two volumes, though, is I'm going to have one main, larger story and keep the books so the volumes will be a little bit smaller and a little bit more focused on a particular aspect of story instead of the two volumes. But that's what I'm working on right now.
That sounds amazing. I can't wait to be able to read them and make sure that I link your webpage below so that they can find where you're at. So I'll just give you the first couple of minutes. Is there anything you'd like to promote or showcase before we go off?
Well, if you want to visit my website, oldgrandmotherstree.com, on there you'll find a Wikipedia of all the characters all in the stories, my world building, my biography of Natasha Polly Smith, who's the artist of this book series, some sample illustrations from that, book summaries, links to other podcasts that I've actually been on, and my email address is boltonje364 at gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for coming on. And everybody in the audience, stay weird.
Stay weird.